Alright guys, so for a couple of weeks now, we have been covering reports that the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, was weighing the potential of issuing arrest warrants for top Israeli officials for war crimes committed in Gaza. And then earlier today, we get this. So, statement of the ICC prosecutor Karim Khan, applications for arrest warrants in the situation in the state of Palestine. So this is an application that is then going to be passed on to an International Criminal Court panel of judges who are going to then get the final say as to whether or not to issue these arrest warrants. So it's not the final stage, but this is significant. So I'm going to read you some of the details here because they not only are applying to issue arrest warrants for Israeli officials, but also for Hamas officials, right? So this kind of kneecaps one of the main talking points that we've been hearing about, the ICC and the ICJ and the UN, they're all just Hamas syndicates and they're all biased against Israel. No, they're actually issuing warrants against top Hamas leaders as well. So they say here, on the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that Sinwar, the head of the Islamic resistance movement Hamas in the Gaza Strip, as well as Mohammed Diab Ibrahim al-Marsi, or Masri, more commonly known as Deif, the commander-in-chief for the military wing of Hamas, also known as the Al-Qassam Brigades, as well as Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the Hamas Political Bureau, bear responsibility for the following war crimes and crimes against humanity committed on the territory of Israel and the state of Palestine since October 7th. So, here's the list for these Hamas leaders. Extermination as a crime against humanity, murder as a crime against humanity as well as a war crime, taking hostages as a war crime, rape and other acts of sexual violence as crimes against humanity, also as war crimes pursuant to these articles in the context of captivity. So the rest of these charges against the Hamas guys actually doesn't have to do with the October 7th attack in and of itself. They're talking about the treatment of hostages inside of Gaza. So that's the context that they make these allegations. So they continue, torture as a crime against humanity and also a war crime in the context of captivity, other inhumane acts as a crime against humanity in the context of captivity, cruel treatment as a war crime in the context of captivity, and then finally, outrages upon personal dignity as a war crime in the context of captivity. So again, basically half of these charges, it looks like, are dealing with the treatment or alleged treatment of Israeli hostages that have been kept inside of Gaza since the October 7th attack. Which is interesting, right? Because we've been talking about the lack of evidence that has been provided in terms of rape and sexual assault on October 7th, but they're saying they have credible evidence that some of the hostages that have been kept in Gaza have been subjected to those kinds of treatments. So here we get to the Israeli side of this. They say, on the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, as well as Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense of Israel, bear criminal responsibility for the following war crimes and crimes against humanity. So, number one, starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, as a war crime of this statute. Starvation, they're saying explicitly, Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war, not as an accident, not as a whoopsie-daisy, as an intentional policy. They say willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, contrary to this article, or cruel treatment as a war crime, contrary to this other article. Willful killing, contrary to this article, or murder as a war crime. Intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population as a war crime. Extermination and or murder, contrary to these articles, including in the context of deaths caused by starvation as a crime against humanity. The final two here, persecution as a crime against humanity, and other inhumane acts as crimes against humanity. So what are we supposed to take from this? Well, I found this thread that I thought was interesting. It brings up some of the holes in this report. Broadly, again, my takeaway from this is that this is a massive step. I never thought that in my lifetime we would see the International Criminal Court issue arrest warrants for guys like Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. Now, the other initial reading that I had on this is, where are some of the other guys, right? Where's Itamar Ben-Gvir? Where's Bezalel Smotrich? Where's Isaac Herzog? There's a whole list of dozens of top Israeli officials, members of the war cabinet, top commanders, even members of the Knesset, who have aggressively either urged on this genocide or been directly complicit in genocidal acts inside of Gaza. as well as the countless IDF soldiers who have openly bragged and posted their war crimes online for everybody to see. So clearly this doesn't go as far as I would like to see, but at the same time, again, it's a massive step that this is even happening at all, right? Now, the other point that needs to be brought up, because this is going to come into play as we get to the US and Israel freak out over all of this, is that Israel is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. Neither is the United States. However, Palestine is. Okay, they were a signatory from all the way back in, I believe, 2015. So that's what they're claiming is giving them the jurisdiction to be able to do this, right? And again, keep that in the back of your mind, because it's going to be important further on. So anyways, we get to this breakdown here from Nimer Soltani on some of what his takeaway was from this ICC charge. They say, number one, it is surprising that the request names 2 Israelis but 3 Palestinians, and the charges that the Palestinians got included 8 counts, but the Israelis with only 7. So, I mean, again, that is kind of interesting, right? With all of the atrocities, with all of the brazen war crimes we have seen, there are somehow more charges against Hamas than there are against Israel and the IDF. He says, number 2, the charges against Hamas, but not against Israel, include torture, cruel treatment as a war crime, and outrages upon personal dignity. And as he points out here, torture, you're saying that we're not going to charge Israel with torture? How many credible reports of torture of Gaza detainees and even West Bank detainees have we covered on this channel? I mean, verifiable evidence of outright torture in some of these detention camps. They've effectively set up literal concentration camps inside the Negev desert, okay, inside of Israeli territory, where they have been mass rounding up and detaining and torturing people who they have taken from Gaza. So that to me is also kind of strange. They say the assessment of the conflict between Hamas and Palestine and Israel by the prosecutor in his announcement makes no mention of the occupation either, the occupation of Gaza as well as the occupation of the West Bank. He also says that the prosecutor says Israel, like all states, has a right to take action to defend its population. This formulation seems to avoid self-defense, but again ignores the occupation, which is important because if you are an occupying power, your right to self-defense is actually significantly different than if you're not an occupying power. And the same goes for Palestinians, right? We constantly hear about how Israel has a right to defend themselves in the context of trying to justify genocidal acts in Gaza. We never hear the reverse of that. And the fact of the matter is, under international law, Palestinians do have a right to armed self-defense against their occupier. That's a fact. Now, that doesn't mean you have a right to kill civilians, but you do have a right to armed resistance to occupation, okay? They finish off here. He says, although there is an obvious urgency from crimes since October, the ICC prosecutor says nothing regarding the ongoing and pre-October allegations against Israeli leaders with respect to the illegal settlements and the apartheid. So again, it's a big step. There's a lot missing here, though. Now, we get to the response. Israel, as a reminder here, just for everybody, as we get to their freak out over all of this, the guy who issued this report, Karim Khan, he was the favorite for Israel to be the next head of the ICC, right? They wanted him to be in this position. He was their preferred candidate, according to the Times of Israel here. And so what's their response now? Well, hear from Katz, the Israeli former foreign minister. He says the outrageous decision by the prosecutor of the ICC in The Hague is an unrestrained frontal assault on the victims of October 7th and the hostages in Gaza. While Hamas murderers and rapists commit crimes against humanity against our brothers and sisters, the prosecutor mentions in the same breath the Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Israel alongside the vile Nazi-like monsters of Hamas, a historical disgrace that will be remembered forever. I mean, listen, if we're being real here, the closest iteration of modern Nazism right now would be the Israeli government. Okay, let's be real. Benjamin Netanyahu is closer to being Hitler 2.0 than any Palestinian. He says, I have instructed the immediate establishment of a special command center at the foreign ministry with all professional entities aimed at fighting against the decision, intended primarily to shackle Israel's hands and prevent it from exercising its right to self-defense. I mean, again, you heard it in the report there. They do go out of their way to say you have a right to defend your people. That doesn't mean you have a right to go and massacre a bunch of innocent civilians, right? Kind of two different things. Nobody's saying you don't have a right to defend the civilians inside of Israel. That's not what any of this is about. This is about you going in and endlessly starving and bombing men, women, and children who had nothing to do with October 7th. That's what this is about. He finishes off. He says, I intend to speak with foreign ministers of leading countries around the world and urge them to oppose the prosecutor's decision and declare that even if the warrants are issued, they do not intend to enforce them against Israeli leaders. So, I mean, this is really the key sticking point. The ICC does not have a military. They do not have a police force that they're going to go send to Israel or send to any place around the world to go and arrest these guys. The only way that an arrest could even possibly happen is if the judge panel accepts this report and firmly establishes the actual arrest warrants, and then you would have to have, anytime Benjamin Netanyahu or Yoav Gallant go to a different country that is a signatory of the ICC, that country would then have to make the decision to arrest them while they're on their land. So I mean, it's a pretty far stretch to think that they're actually going to be arrested, right? Especially as you have clearly the United States, many other Western European countries as well. Like, how many countries are actually going to be willing to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu on their own soil? Let's be real about it, right? So it does have strong, implications, and it will definitely make their lives more difficult. But in terms of actually seeing them thrown behind jail bars, yet to be seen exactly how likely that's going to be. Now, we get to Biden's response here. Here from Barack Ravid. Biden says, the ICC's prosecutor's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders is outrageous. Outrageous, he says. And let me be clear, whatever this prosecutor might imply, there is no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas. We will always stand with Israel against threats to its security, and I guess by that he means we will stand with Israel and continue to arm and fund them and give them diplomatic cover as they committed genocide. That's what he's saying there. Now, the other reason I think that this is interesting, right, and I'll get to a little bit of a hypocrisy burn here in a second, but this line right here, let me be clear. Whatever this prosecutor may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Okay, nobody's saying that. First off, okay, two different things here. Number one, if you actually want to do a comparison between the government of Israel versus Hamas, and you want to tally up their list of atrocities, the amount of blood that they have on their hands, whatever worst crime you could imagine that they have done, and you want to do a cross comparison there, I hate to break it to you, Joe, but Israel's not going to come out as the moral superior in that kind of a conversation. That's number one. But number two, and even more importantly, is the standard here for Israel facing these arrest warrants is not Hamas. Hamas and whatever they've done is not the standard. It has nothing to do with this, actually. The standard is international law. That's the standard. So whether or not you think this prosecutor has some sort of a moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel is totally irrelevant. It's based on the facts. Has Israel violated international law? If yes, then they should be prosecuted. Has Hamas violated international law? If yes, then they should be prosecuted. What is so complicated about this? You have to do some sort of a comparison to Hamas to say, well, I think that Israel's not as bad as Hamas, and so therefore what? International law doesn't apply? Hamas committed X atrocity, so we get to commit X atrocity ourselves? That's not how this shit works, buddy. Now we continue here. Biden calls the ICC moves outrageous again, and then Blinken says that the U.S. fundamentally rejects the announcement and accuses prosecutor Karim Khan of a rush to seek these arrest warrants rather than allowing the Israeli legal system a full and timely opportunity to proceed. First off, buddy, we know that Israel is not doing any sort of legitimate investigations into their own war crimes. That's a fucking joke at face value. But number two, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to wait until every single Gazan has either been expelled or killed from Gaza? That's what we're supposed to do? Wait for that to happen, and then maybe a couple years down the line, Israel will give a slap on the wrist to a couple IDF soldiers who engaged in brazen war crimes? That's what we're supposed to do? There have been no conclusions of investigations that have held anybody in Israel accountable by any real metric. So, I mean, just completely pathetic there. Now, it's also pathetic, again, because of the hypocrisy, right? This is just from a couple years ago, just from last year, actually. It's justified. Joe Biden welcomes ICC arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. It's kind of weird how the credibility of ICC warrants somehow depends entirely on whether or not you are a U.S. ally. That's apparently what determines the credibility of these kinds of warrants. Now, the irony of this situation is that Joe Biden's defense and the U.S. government's defense of Israel against the ICC is to say they do not have the jurisdiction to go after Israel, right? Because Israel is not a signatory to the ICC. Now, Palestine is a signatory to the ICC since 2015. Israel is not. But that argument that they're using along jurisdictional grounds is the exact bar for bar, word for word defense that Vladimir Putin gave when the ICC issued arrest warrants for him. So let's just be clear about what's happening here. The same thing that just a year ago Biden said was entirely justified because Putin's this vicious war criminal, which I actually agree with, but it's justified when it's for Putin, but then when it's Israel committing far worse atrocities than what Putin has done in Ukraine, then suddenly the ICC has no credibility. I'd never even heard of them. Who are these people? They're being mean to us. It's just completely ridiculous, right? Now we move on. We have some more Joe Biden here for you. So he gave a speech at Morehouse College, I guess trying to win back some African-American support that's been plummeting off a cliff for him in the last couple of months. And as he was giving this speech, there were a couple interesting moments, but I picked out this one. He tells a lie that he's told before and then has had to correct the record on, but for some reason is still telling. So let's go ahead and watch this real quick.
What's happening in Gaza and Israel is heartbreaking. Hamas's vicious attack on Israel, killing innocent lives and holding people hostage. I was there 9 days after. Sent pictures of tying a mother and a daughter in a rope, pouring kerosene on them, burning them, and watching as they died.
Okay, so there's only one problem with this. That never happened. There are no pictures that show that. He's just completely lying. And you know how I know that he's lying is, number one, because we don't even have claims like that coming from the Israeli government anymore that have any demonstrable evidence to back them up. But number two, again, his administration had to issue a correction the last time that he told this same lie. And they had to come out and they said, no, he hasn't seen any pictures like that. Because the pictures don't fucking exist. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is the same Joe that said that he saw pictures of the 40 beheaded babies, which also never happened. So he's just explicitly making up atrocities, which, by the way, you don't even have to do. There were actual atrocities. There were civilians who were killed, massacred on October 7th. You don't got to make anything up. But he feels, I guess, like he has to make shit up to make Hamas seem like they're more vicious and more savage by comparison to Israel, because then that downplays Israeli atrocities in Gaza. That's, I think, what's maybe going on in his mind. Maybe there's nothing going on in his mind. I don't know. I'm not a mind reader, but pretty insane that he's just out here doing like Trump level lying on a regular basis. And it seems like most of the media just doesn't really give a shit that he's just making shit up like this. I mean, Jesus. We continue. We have more here. This is from Chuck Schumer responding to the ICC arrest warrants. He said, "It is profoundly unfair and reprehensible for the International Criminal Court to issue warrants for Israeli leaders. Profoundly unfair and reprehensible." You know what's actually profoundly unfair is if people are able, legally, to go around massacring incalculable amounts of civilians and flatten an entire region with no accountability. That would actually be reprehensible. That would actually be profoundly unfair and outrageous, right? But that's somehow a world that they want to live in, right? Now we also have Speaker Mike Johnson, who has reportedly just confirmed that there's going to be a vote to sanction the ICC. So he said Congress is reviewing all options, including sanctions, to punish the ICC and ensure its leadership faces consequences if they proceed. I've also seen other Republicans who were tweeting out basically threats against the ICC, right? And we've seen this before where there was a letter that was sent to the ICC by a bunch of Republicans. I think it was over 20 of them. And they basically threatened them. They said, you know, you guys, if you push forward with these warrants against Israel, our best buddy, our friend, then we are going to ruin your lives. We're going to sanction you. We are going to, ruin the lives of your families even by extension. And it's just complete psychopath behavior. I mean, I don't even really know how else to characterize this. It's fucking psycho shit, okay? We have members of Congress who are talking about sanctioning the International Criminal Court because they dared to issue arrest warrants based on credible evidence of violations of international law. I mean, this is how you know all of this is bullshit. This is how you know that the idea that the United States of America is this beacon for freedom and democracy and human rights and international law and order. It's bullshit. If you're an ally, you get one set of rules, which is to say you have no rules. If you're an enemy, then we are going to use every single piece of legalese and international legal standards to try to bear down on you. And you better pretend, or you better expect that we are going to, try to use moral grandstanding against you as well. I mean, it's just utterly ridiculous. We also have this. House passes GOP bill to force Biden to continue weapons transfers to Israel. So they say this is not likely to pass in the Senate. But again, just sort of a measure of where the U.S. House of Representatives is. They passed a bill, and I'm not kidding here, guys. They threatened to defund the U.S. military, to defund them if they did not immediately proceed with the transfer of weapons to Israel. This is where we're at, guys. So even as we've known for a long time that the weapon shipments that we have been sending to Israel, billions of dollars worth, are totally illegal under things like the Leahy Law. It's illegal to send weapons to a country, a military, a militia that is engaging in grievous human rights abuses, okay? It's illegal for us to be doing that. But instead of trying to enforce that law, our Congress is doing the opposite of that. They're saying if you even mildly, because keep in mind, what Joe Biden did, he didn't cut off weapons to Israel. He cut off like a few 2,000-pound bombs here and there and some artillery and whatever, and it was sort of temporary, whatever. He didn't cut off weapons to Israel, but even that mild step on trying to apply pressure on Israel, even that is a bridge too far for the GOP and for many Democrats as well. That's a bridge too far. We need to do the opposite of what established U.S. law says we should do and actually say, no, you can't put any restrictions on weapons transfers to Israel at all. No standards, no, giving a shit about human rights abuses or allegations of war crimes. No, they're our friend. They're our buddy in the region. They get everything they want. And if you dare to try to throw a wrench in that, we're going to bring down the full weight of the U.S. government on you. That's what they're saying. Now, a few more things here. We had some interesting back and forths that were happening at the State Department press briefing today. This was one with Ryan Grimm, and it pretty much, I'm not going to play the whole thing, but it pretty much gets to the same point that I was bringing up with this Putin, Putin throwback from last year about jurisdiction and about previous statements from U.S. officials who have said that the ICC does have jurisdiction. Let's just go ahead and watch a little bit of this back and forth here.
The International Criminal Court, you said that because the Palestinians are not a state actor, they don't have jurisdiction over their side. But back in 2014, I just Googled this one up. Jen Psaki was up here, your colleague. The statement was, today the ICC convicted Jermaine Katanga, the commander of the FRPI militia, for his responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The ICC's DRC cases represent a significant step toward delivering justice for victims in the DRC. She then went on to say the United States reiterates its call for the apprehension of Sylvester Mudakumora, another leader of an abusive rebel militia in the DRC, who is subject to an arrest warrant by the ICC. The Department of State continues to offer a reward of up to $5 million for information leading to his arrest. So, at least in 2014, it was the position of the administration that you could even put out a reward for the arrest of somebody that would then go to the ICC and would have jurisdiction. So why does it not that apply to the current Congress?
So we have supported the work of the ICC in previous cases. I can't speak to this case because I don't know the fundamentals of it. I don't know the jurisdictional questions. Ultimately, the main way that the ICC has jurisdiction is if one of the two state parties to a case is a signatory to the Rome Statute and comes in under the ICC's jurisdiction. That is not the case here. You have Israel, who of course is not a signatory to the ICC. The Palestinians, who do not represent a state at this time, and so in our view cannot sign the Rome Statute and come under the ICC's jurisdiction. I can't speak to other cases. I'd have to look into it.
So, do you understand the weaselly shit that he's trying to pull here? He's saying, even though Palestine is a signatory to the ICC, right? And that gives them that jurisdictional authority. He's saying they actually don't have the authority. They don't have the jurisdiction because we, the United States of America, don't believe in a Palestinian state. We do not acknowledge the existence of a Palestinian state, so therefore they cannot have any sort of jurisdiction. I mean, we've covered stories just over the last couple of months. How many times have we seen the United States government veto these votes that are happening at the United Nations that would push to establish a Palestinian state? They vetoed that multiple times just in the last couple of months. Prospects of Palestinian statehood at the United Nations. We hear this rhetoric over and over and over again from the Biden administration. We believe in a two-state solution, this and that. And then when it comes to their actions, it says something a little bit different, right? When you're taking votes at the United Nations, or when you're partnering with Israel, that's led by a guy, Benjamin Netanyahu, who completely is against any sort of prospects of a Palestinian state, then it's a completely different tune, right? You can't say that you support a two-state solution and then do absolutely fuck all to actually work towards a two-state solution. The government of Israel is firmly against that prospect. And so not only are you aiding and abetting in Israel blocking the prospect of a two-state solution, but then you are turning around and using the lack of a U.S. recognized Palestinian state as a justification to say you Palestinians don't have a right to go to the International Criminal Court to try to get safeguards or accountability from Israeli war crimes committed against you. Is that not the most twisted, sick shit you've ever heard? We also have more clips here. This one from Matt Lee, always asking the best questions at these briefings. And also shout out to Ryan Grimm. He's always doing a good job too. This is on a similar question, but you're just going to see how Matthew Miller just completely crumbles under the weight of this back and forth.
Focus on jurisdiction for a second. Who does have jurisdiction here?
So the government of Israel has jurisdiction
Over the occupied territory.
We have jurisdiction
Over Gaza, which is not entirely
They
occupied.
have jurisdiction into looking at the actions
Okay,
by their
so the
military personnel.
Palestinians, if they have a complaint, they have to bring it to Israeli courts.
We have jurisdiction, and we
You have
with the
jurisdiction?
use of our equipment.
I'm sorry. How do you have
with the
jurisdiction?
use of our military equipment
Matt,
that we have provided?
How do you have jurisdiction?
If you look at the Leahy law, if you look
No,
at
that's not jurisdiction in a criminal process. That's
not in the
jurisdiction
criminal
over-
process, but it has to do with the determinations that we make and the policies that flow
but
from
that's
it.
not
So,
jurisdiction.
but Matt, long term, you were right that we want to see.
You used to work for DOJ, Matt.
You were,
Come on.
you-
There's no.
it is-
U.S.
it
does
is
not have jurisdiction.
There are
here.
different. I wasn't referring to criminal jurisdiction, Matt. There are different ways to look at this. Long term, we agree with you that the Palestinian people should be a state that has the. And
Okay, so this is genuinely, I've covered a lot of these State Department back and forths. This may be the most humiliating one that I've ever seen, okay? He was asked a question that was very simple, right? The idea of the question that Matt Lee is asking here is, you guys do not recognize that the ICC has jurisdiction in this situation, right? Again, we just talked about that. They say Palestine isn't a state. We don't recognize them as a state. Therefore, they cannot ask to even join the ICC, even though they already did back in 2015. And Israel is not a signatory to the ICC. So therefore, there's no jurisdiction, right? And so Matt Lee's question here is, if that's your claim, that the ICC doesn't have jurisdiction here, who are Palestinians supposed to go to settle these kinds of disputes around war crimes that were committed by Israel against them? Who are they supposed to go and ask for help to try to get some sort of accountability? And his response there is what? To say, at first, that they should go to Israel? They should ask the Israeli government to investigate their own war crimes against the Palestinians? And then when he realizes that that's an idiotic thing to say, he spins it back and he says, like, no, I'm actually going to completely change the definition of what we're talking about here. So he just completely changes the definition of what the question was, which was about jurisdiction. And now he's not talking about ICC jurisdiction. He's changing it to be talking about the Leahy law and how, I guess, the U.S. government, through the Leahy law, can withhold weapons to Israel, and therefore that is some sort of a jurisdiction to hold them accountable for crimes committed against Palestinians, but also, at the same time, we're not going to use the Leahy law? I mean, I've been talking about the Leahy law for months, about how the Leahy law clearly says that we are not legally allowed to give weapons to Israel right now. Point blank, period. That's as clear as you could get with a U.S. law like that. And he brings that up as an example of saying, well, that's the jurisdiction that we have. That's how we're going to hold Israel accountable. But oh, by the way, we're going to allow them to engage in a seven months long genocide against the Palestinians without using the Leahy law at all. Okay, so then what would the standards have to be for you to actually implement the Leahy law at a significant scale? There is none. There are no standards. There's nothing Israel could do that would result in them taking action on that front. So just infuriating and humiliating at the same time. Now, just a few more things. As all of this is happening, right? Here's some of the latest atrocities coming out of Israel and Gaza. Here from Cindy McCain, the head of the World Food Program. Now, we've talked about the previous reports that she's put out saying there's already a full-blown famine in the north. This is her latest. Imagine a child wasting into the size of a skeleton, and of course passing from it, and an adult doing the same thing. That's what we're seeing on the ground. I'm having to make the decision about taking food from the hungry and giving it to the starving. The size of a skeleton. We're in the midst of a full-blown famine right now, guys. That's what this is. A man-made famine. An intentionally man-made famine as a strategy of war. A strategy of collective punishment against the Palestinian people. And this is, the government that's doing this is the same government that Joe Biden and his administration are insisting, there's no evidence of any crimes. No evidence of any wrongdoing whatsoever. Jesus Christ. At the same time, by the way, I should mention, they apparently finished building that bullshit port, the pier, the floating pier, off the coast of Gaza. Now, that's been an embarrassment from the beginning. It was never, even in a hypothetical best-case scenario, going to be able to deliver adequate amount of aid getting into Gaza, because the aid that needs to get into Gaza needs to come over the land crossings, which Israel has shut down. And even building that pier in the first place was an admission, without actually admitting it, that of course Israel is blocking the aid. Why would you need to go and build a port off the coast of Gaza if Israel was not blocking the land crossings? Of course they are. But the U.S. can't say that openly, because then it's a violation of the Leahy Law for us to be sending them weapons. I mean, we got more here. Israel's supposedly limited operation in Rafah has now managed to force 800,000 Palestinians to flee, of 1.4 million who have been sheltering there, more than half. And remember, guys, there is nowhere to go. There is nowhere to go. They've been telling them to go to Al-Mawasi, which is a giant open desert area with nothing in it, no medical supplies, no housing, nothing. Food, water, nothing. And they're telling them to go there. To walk through the rubble, to walk through the unexploded ordinances, to walk through the airstrikes and the sniper bullets, to go into the middle of a desert, to waste away and die. That's what they're giving them. Those are the two options. Go to the desert and die, or stay in Rafah and die. Those are the two options that they've been giving. 800,000. Does this sound like a limited operation to you? Because remember, Joe Biden said that going into Rafah in a major way was his red line. And then after they went into Rafah, he sort of changed it, and he was like, well, they technically haven't gone into the major population centers, and so I'm not really counting this yet. What does this look like? 800,000 people out of a population that totals only 2 million. And they just forced 800,000 people to move. Most of these people had already had to move to Rafah in the first place. Now they're being shifted around again, and you're still insisting that this isn't a major operation in Rafah. This is a limited targeted operation. A limited targeted operation that requires the expulsion of nearly 1 million people in just a couple of weeks. Jesus, man. We also had this story that came out a couple of days ago at this point, but just gives you an insight in terms of where Israeli society is at right now. I mean, it's heading to as dark of a place as you could possibly imagine. This is just the latest. We had a Palestinian truck driver who was brutally attacked and assaulted. You can see him here on the ground with IDF soldiers standing around doing nothing to help him at all, nor are they making arrests of the Israeli settlers that you can see here that brutally attacked him. Now, why did they attack this Palestinian truck driver? Because they thought, incorrectly it happens to be, but they thought that he was bringing aid to Gaza. This is where we're at in Israel. We have heavily armed, right-wing, Zionist terrorists who are going around and brutally assaulting and attacking Palestinian truck drivers because they thought they may be bringing aid to the population that were starving. This is where we're at. This is the country that we are giving billions of dollars to, guys. No accountability. I mean, you can see the police, the soldiers standing around here doing fucking nothing. They're not arresting anybody. They're not even helping the guy out on the ground. Nothing. We also have this. Of course, more war crimes being publicly posted by IDF soldiers. Here was one that I saw on my feed of him just destroying dishes. I mean, he's not killing anybody in this clip, technically. But again, just kind of an insight into the mindset of some of these IDF soldiers. You force somebody out of their house, you kill them potentially, and then you go into their kitchen and just start breaking shit. Just start breaking shit. Does this look like a targeted operation against Hamas? Does that look like what these soldiers believe that they're doing here? Or does it look like they're engaging in sort of genocidal acts, right? Maybe even some war crimes, you might think. I mean, just wanton destruction for the sake of destruction. Unless, I guess, these plates and dishes had Hamas militants hiding underneath them. We also had this, again, another reminder here. Israeli soldiers who, you can literally see the spray paint in his hand right here, spray painted Nakba 2023. And they're proudly standing here next to the wall, smiling and all of that, giving a thumbs up. So I don't know how much clearer you could possibly get, right? Now again, the ICC should also go after guys like this. You can't write Nakba 2023 on the wall and then expect people are going to believe you're fighting Hamas. You're not. You're making explicit genocidal statements. You might as well have literally just written on the wall, I heart genocide. I mean, that's effectively what you're doing here. Of course, there's not going to be any accountability for that either, right? Now, 2 more things and then we'll finish it off. Another airstrike, separate from the other airstrikes that I've shown you guys over the last couple of weeks. This one was in central Gaza. 27 people, mostly women and children, of course, because that is what has characterized this entire, post-October 7th reality in Gaza. A vast majority of the people who have been killed have been innocent men, women, and children, but even a majority has just been women and children. And this airstrike is just another example of that. Now, last thing here. Every accusation is a confession, guys. Israeli army appears to be using Gaza hospital and school as bases. Military bases, right? The thing that we've been hearing as an allegation against Hamas that's supposed to prove how horrible and inhumane and criminal Hamas is, right? Hamas uses hospitals, they're hiding in schools and this and that. And then you are literally doing that. You are literally occupying hospitals that you've attacked, that you've destroyed, and schools, and then you are setting up military bases inside of them. Guys, I have seen infinitely more evidence that Israel has been using civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and schools, as military bases than I have for Hamas. I mean, this is something that I thought of just the other day when I was thinking back on the attack at Al-Shifa Hospital, is that, we get a lot of videos, right? We get a lot of videos from the IDF directly during their military operations, especially if it will help aid their propaganda efforts. And one thing that I thought was suspicious is that you had a 2-week-long raid on Al-Shifa Hospital, and you're telling me that there is not a single video of a Hamas militant firing a rocket or something from inside the hospital. Not a single video. Because if that video existed, and I'm sure that they were recording while they were in the middle of this 2-week-long raid, if that video existed, the Israeli military, the Israeli government, US politicians would be using it every single day as a justification to say, look, here's definitive proof Hamas is using these locations as human shields or whatever you want to say. There's no video. There's no video of that. Now, I thought that was interesting. Now, anyways, I mean, in terms of the ICC arrest warrants, we'll have to see what the judge panel comes back with. I find it hard to imagine they're just going to reject the claims from the ICC prosecutor, so I would expect that these warrants are going to be followed through on. Now, then you get to the step of, okay, who's actually going to enforce that? It'll certainly make their lives more difficult, but if no country is willing to arrest them when they land on their soil, then effectively there's not much weight behind it. But it is definitely a win, at least morally, right? At least in just saying, okay, we have international institutions that even though they don't have much power to enforce their rulings, at least they are still paying attention to egregious crimes against humanity, right? So I guess it's positive in that front, and of course not surprising at all how the U.S. State Department, the U.S. government, the Biden administration, how they're responding to this, the freak out, the complete attacks against the ICC, the threats against the ICC, and the freak out from Israel as well. I mean, all of this is just a complete and utter shit show.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying